welcome to another episode of Let's Be Perfectly Queer. We've got a very special guest on tonight's show. We're welcoming back to Rogers TV, the incredible Gerry Croteau. Man Time with Gerry. I think those are the only two, right? Was that the only iterations of the show?
I think Man Time was the first, and then with Gerry.
Yeah.
When the producer said, we got to change the name. It's a little bit dated.
Well, without either of those shows, this show would not exist. So I thank you for that. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here to talk about Gerry's retirement. Yes, 20 years in the HIV sector. What began as the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County, now the Gilbert Centre for Social and Support Services. And you're leaving us March 15th. Final day. Bye-bye.
That's right. Yes, it is. It is. It's going to be a very emotional day, I'm sure. Only because, 20 years is not a long time, but in this sector, as you know,
yes,
being in this sector for many years as well, that the longevity of folks working in this sector for 20 years, or even 10 for that matter, has becoming less and less as people move. People move and change jobs. And
for sure. Yeah, and it's not an easy sector to work in. I mean, not-for-profit is not, there's a reason why it's called not-for-profit, because we don't make a whole lot of money.
And we have no way of making extra money except writing grants and hoping fundraisers are a success, yeah.
But part of the success, or the success of those who last 20 plus years, is because that's not why we do the work, right? And so I want to just begin by a little history. Tell us about the beginnings, the origins of the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County, and what got you into this work.
Well, it was incorporated in 1995, in October of 1995, and they received funding, limited funding, from the AIDS Bureau, which is funded through the Government of Ontario. The initial annual from the AIDS Bureau was $58,000 a year.
Wow.
Yeah. So $58,000 a year in 2003 was not a lot to
It's still not. But.
It's still not. But in those days, to keep an agency going, and very limited money in terms of fundraising, because stigma and discriminatory behaviors, not just in Simcoe, Muskoka, but throughout Ontario and Canada, the world, it made it difficult to raise money outside of government grants in terms of getting people to come to the AIDS Walk, for example.
Right. So give me an idea of what the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County looked like in that first year, staffing, programming-wise. What was the initial focus of opening up the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County?
Ed Gilbert, or George Edward Gilbert, and his mother, who lived in Collingwood at the time. Ed was the first, and he was interviewed by another television station about why he started this. And he originally was he was originally living in Toronto. His mother got sick and needed his help, so he moved to Collingwood and was diagnosed with HIV at some point along that continuum of his moving around. And he came out publicly as the first gay man and the first HIV positive man in Simcoe. At the time it was Simcoe, not Simcoe, Muskoka. And nobody would rent to him. He lived on a boat in the harbor, in the yacht club, or the harbor here in Barrie, because no one would rent to him because he was HIV positive. And it wasn't because of anything else other than he was public about it. And so people knew. It wasn't like he was trying to keep it secret. People knew, and he was very determined that there were others just like him. And a lot of people in those days, as you may recall back in the early days, people were being discriminated, couldn't buy food, couldn't rent apartments, because the stigma against HIV, what we know today, isn't what we knew 20 years ago, even 25 years ago. Eventually there was a woman, I don't know who it was, that rented them a space over their garage, a one room. And he and his mother decided to do what they started out was a fund called the Jericho Fund, to help others like Ed, but Ed had his mother, to help others like Ed who had no money. because they lost employment, they lost their housing, they lost food. And so the impetus was, let's raise some dollars to help other folks. And that's how it started back in 1995.
Wow.
And there was a Dr. Gaspar on, I can't remember all the other board members, but there was a few community partners that came on side with them. And then they struggled for years. It wasn't until 98 maybe or 2000 where they started getting money from the AIDS Bureau.
And how many employees, so you started in 2003.
Yep.
And how many employees were part of
There was
the AIDS
two,
committee?
and then I had to let one go with it.
So it was just you for
It was just
a
me
period of time.
for almost 2 years, yeah. And 3 board members.
So what sort of programming did that look like for you when you started as the executive director? When it was just you?
Yeah, it was strictly HIV and AIDS.
Okay.
We didn't have all the 9 programs we have today at the Gilbert Centre did not exist. We had enough money, $58,000 a year. You can't go very far. I mean, $40,000 was my salary.
Right.
Left $18,000 for rent and incidentals and so forth and so on. We didn't have cell phones. Did we have internet? Yeah, we had internet. But that was it. It was very limiting as to what we could do. And then in discussions with other EDs across the province and elsewhere, we realized that unless we diversified our funding and got new funding, we were sort of stuck with one funder. So if that funder didn't like us or pulled funding, we diversed and went into other funding streams before it became sort of trending. Now it's much more trending, but now we have the Government of Canada, we have Simcoe County, we have the AIDS Bureau, and then we have funding coming from people like Benson and Hedges, Pride Run and Remembrance out of Toronto. So we're getting a lot of funding, and now our annual budget is close to $1.8 million.
Wow.
It's taken 20 years already to get there, you know?
Yeah, that's impressive though. And I'm still curious about more of the history and the early days and what you did to draw clients in. I mean, especially in Simcoe, where sure you've got Ed Gilbert, who is public about his HIV status, but certainly in Simcoe and surrounding area, to be public about the fact you're living with HIV, even today, is a struggle for a lot of folks because of the stigma, and quite frankly, because of the very conservative nature of where we live. And I think there's definitely a correlation between stigma and conservative thinking. So, how did you get folks to come into, at the time, the AIDS Committee of Simcoe, to be able to even offer these services to folks?
Yeah, well, we had some community partners like Dr. Howard Krieger, who was a HIV, not a specialist, but he was HIV intelligent, if you will.
Right.
He knew meds. He knew doctors in Toronto. He knew people at Maple Leaf Clinic, for example, Hassle-Free Clinic in Toronto. And so he was a draw because clients would go to him and then he would send them to us. We had limited dollars in terms of helping folks out financially, but we were able to through fundraising. Folks came in and it took a while to build the sense that people knew they could come to us and it was confidential.
Right.
And they weren't afraid. And where we were located within Barrie by the Bay was off any of the main corridors. So it made it, and coming into Barrie by the Bay, because of the amount of other community partners that are within this facility, I don't know how many there are, it was much more discreet. Like you could come in here for a lot of other different reasons.
Sure.
Other than, and the fact that our name was the AIDS Committee, people knew if you were coming to the AIDS Committee, it must, and people just assumed you were gay and HIV positive. That's, and in back, Randy, 20 years ago, HIV and AIDS was really focused on gay guys.
Yeah.
Back then. There was no thought about maybe there's women that might be infected with HIV, maybe there's straight folks that are infected with HIV, which we know today there
Children
are.
and youth. Yeah.
Children and youth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and that's still, I think, that's still the first thought that most folks who aren't familiar with HIV and AIDS, that's what their thought is, that gay guys. That's.
And it was never the intention in the beginning to focus almost entirely on 2S LGBT. It was basically, we're here, our doors are open. And that was the mandate I received in 2003 from the board at the time, was keep the doors open. Because as long as the doors were open, then funding would keep coming, for one thing, and we were able to build on that and build our reputation and build our credibility within Simcoe and now Simcoe Muskoka.
So that's interesting when you talked earlier about folks coming in, and the original space that the AIDS committee was in was sort of off one of the corridors here at Barrie by the Bay where we're filming today.
Yeah.
So where we are today in 80 Bradford is where you've always worked in this line of work. I wasn't 100% sure whether we had another site and
It was
then
always
moved here.
Wow,
okay.
Over almost 25, 26 years.
Wow.
Yeah, because I'm the maybe the third executive director that has been here over almost 30 years. And I think the board, I've had like 11 different board chairs over that period of time.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So give me an idea of the growth from when you started in 2003 to where we are today. You mentioned some of the different programs that we offer besides just HIV and AIDS focused, and sort of an idea of not only the growth of the center and its programming, but sort of the I guess the time frame around the name change from the AIDS committee to the Gilbert Centre, which I'm assuming was to give folks the idea that we are more than just HIV and AIDS, to reflect the programming changes, right?
That's right. And, I don't want to be forgetful that this was not just me. There were many people that we have hired over the years that have been instrumental in helping us in terms of grant writing, in terms of bringing in different thinking or new thinking.
Right.
And, like I was 54 when I started, 53 actually. So I wasn't like, and I had no experience in the HIV/AIDS sector, but what I did have was I came out of working with seniors. And my pitch to the board when they were hiring for the position that I got was that I'm used to working with people who are disenfranchised, people who are stigmatized because of ageism, people who are, because they're old, some of the folks were stuck into seniors' residences, and family living even 20 minutes away or even 10 minutes away would visit their parents once a year.
Yeah.
And they were on life-saving medication, heart pills, water pills, cholesterol, what have you. So I had a sense of what it was like to work with a population that was heavily stigmatized because of ageism, and that was heavily medicated, and without their meds, they're dead, really. And in the beginning, in 2003, 2004 and onward, and even today, people who are HIV positive without meds, their lifespan is greatly reduced. So I had that going for me in the sense that I understood what it was like, to some extent, to be stigmatized. Whether it's HIV is much more stigmatizing maybe than ageism, but ageism was still a stigma on many people. And that's how I got it. And maybe there's only 3 of us that applied anyway, And not everybody wanted to be working in this sector. Well, that was the thing too.
Yeah, because then you, as someone who is negative, going to work for the AIDS committee, the assumption, I'm sure, in a lot of folks' eyes is, well, Gerry must be living with HIV then, right? Yeah. And why else would you take on a role like this?
Yeah, and plus I was married to a woman and had kids and everything, so it came across as being, I was a straight guy running the organization, and it took me a while to start saying, well, maybe I'm not so straight. Maybe I'm a little,
Well, and you know what? Straight folks, as you mentioned, can also be living with HIV and can absolutely empathize and manage an organization like this as well. But yeah, I get your point, and I'm a firm believer of,
I have to say this, so my wife at the time, we're separated now, but my wife at the time automatically assumed that I was comfortable because I must be bi or gay to work in an organization that caters to gay men. It was not LGBT or 2S LGBT, which is today. Yeah. And so within my own personal experience, I was stigmatized for coming to work at the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County, and plus to get board members, the same thing, right?
Sure.
A lot of board members, why are you on the board of the AIDS Committee? Like, are you gay, or are you HIV? It was automatically gay, HIV positive if you were connected to the AIDS Committee of Simcoe County back then. It's changed a lot since, but even today, as you know, even today, there's still stigma, and there's still stigma trying to get, just a little.
Yeah. So what prompted the name change to the Gilbert Centre? And I'm assuming that was also a nod to our founder, Ed Gilbert.
Yeah. What it was trending within the sector because of the new medications that were out, and AIDS was not becoming that would destroy you. You could control it. You could live a very normal, healthy life being on meds. And as you know, you're a great supporter of U=U, as am I, as is the Gilbert Centre, as is a lot of other folks. I mean, I kudos to Bruce Richmond, who is a friend of ours, who brought to light about U=U, and that was a game changer. So that it was trending anyway. We had different names that came up, and it was a nightmare because we had to go through letters pat and we had to change everything.
Right.
But names came up like checkers. Don't be a pawn in someone's life. Why be a pawn when you can be a queen? You know, like that.
Oh, jeez.
You know, things like that. We had all these little catchy phrases, you know.
Yeah.
Check. Have you been checkmate? Did you get checked for HIV?
Oh, yeah.
You know, things like that. I know. Yeah.
I'm glad we went with Gilbert Centre.
But we put it to a vote, and it was a nod to Ed Gilbert and a respect to his legacy and his family's legacy.
Sure, well deserved.
And also the fact that he was a beacon in a very stigmatized world, that he had the courage to put himself out there.
Yeah.
Because his mother, I think her name was Doris Gilbert, who has since passed away.
Right.
She said to me, they were walking down the street, she and Gilbert, in Collingwood, and there was a woman, it happened to be a woman, walking towards them, noticed them, and walked across the street. You know, and she said, and that's not back in 2003. This was in the last 5 years. To this day.
I don't doubt it, because that was sort of the impetus for me getting involved in this work when Aaron and I moved here in 2017 and watching a segment on the local newscast around the AIDS Walk that year, and the folks that they interviewed had their faces disguised and their voices muffled so you couldn't tell who they were. And that's what sort of sparked the accidental HIV activist in me, right? Seeing that and realizing that in Barrie, Simcoe, Muskoka, in 2017, there wasn't a single individual living with HIV that CTV Barrie could put on and show their face and identify themselves as someone living with HIV. It pissed me off, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And I think that's, having grown up in this area and moved away and then coming back 30 years later and seeing that not a whole lot had changed, I felt the need to do that. And if not for the Gilbert Centre being there and encouraging me in that, I mean, I raised a bunch of money for the AIDS Walk there. I think it was the last AIDS Walk that we held, actually, and the very first one that I was ever involved with. That's how I connected with the folks here at the centre. And then when the opportunity came up, when Lee was departing to go to nursing college, and they approached me and said, I think you'd be good in this role. I had no experience in...
I think we hired you just as you got off the plane and when you were getting married that year.
Yes, I began working here in August of 2018.
You were on your way to getting married in Nova Scotia?
The flight had landed and we flew into Moncton, and then we were driving to where we got married, and the plane landed and my phone was going off just as I turned it back on off of airplane mode, and it was you saying, you got the job. And I said, great, I'll be back after my honeymoon. A few weeks later, I came back. And
in fact, somebody that we interviewed, and I had to tell them that they didn't get it, and they said, well, who got it? And I said, a gentleman by the name of Randy Davis. Good. I like Randy. I'm glad you hired him. And I thought, kudos, we made a good decision. But getting back to the Gilbert Centre, so...
No, let's talk more about me.
Enough about you. What do you think about it? But the Gilbert Centre made a lot of sense in the end. It just, the rationale behind the thinking, the fact that we tied in the history and brought it forward current. And then we had a great graphic designer named Carolyn Harmon, who is a registered graphic designer out of Ottawa, who came up with the GC and the rationale behind it all. And we officially launched it in 2015. And of course, everybody said, well, it's a gay organization. Right. Well, most of the folks that we work with identify within the 2S LGBT community.
Right.
So it made sense, you know, and our trans programming has been extended beyond what it was, and we didn't even work with trans folks in 2003. I mean, we were limited to working because of money, funding streams. We were limited to working with HIV positive folks, but you know, it improved over the years. And now we have 9 programs. We have programs that in the beginning I never even envisioned.
Sure.
Because we were so close to closing because funding streams were not coming in, and it required us to have, you know, money. Rents were going up. People coming to apply for jobs wanted more than $22,000 a year.
Absolutely.
You know,
I know I did.
Yeah, I know.
So, in the limited amount of time that we have left, give me an idea. Over the years, 20 years now, programs come and go. We've seen a lot of changes. If there was one thing, and I know this is difficult to probably nail it down to one thing, but if there is one thing that you and your team at the center has been able to accomplish in those 20 years, what would you say that one thing is that really stands out as sort of a watershed moment?
We're open. We're open for business.
Amen to that.
You know, we're open, and we have continued, and we're building, and we have a much younger staff.
You're not looking at me, I know. But.
You're younger than me, but everybody is here.
That's true.
But it's been a challenge to find the right people to do the work that's needed, and it's not for everybody. It's a difficult sector, as you know. It's very challenging, and we've had great community partners like Rogers Television, who supported our programming for, I think I was there for 9.8 years. The 0.8 is 8 months. I was able, and we were live then, just ask the producer of this program, we were live then, but I was able at every show to talk about the AIDS Committee or the Gilbert Centre. Just, at the Gilbert Centre, or just mention it. And we had a lot of folks from the Gilbert Centre and from the AIDS Committee on the show to talk about programming. Yeah. So every Friday, and it was live television then, which was an interesting.
That would be fun.
But it was always out there into the community. So it was free.
Yeah.
So it was great advertising. We couldn't have afforded that kind of advertising. Television advertising, I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I just personally want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
Only because, obviously, we may have to cut some of this. Obviously, as someone living with HIV, this work is incredibly personal.
It is personal.
But what I want to really express is that in coming into this role as the Gay Men's Sexual Health Coordinator, not a title I've ever really been fond of, but I'll take it. You have always allowed me to just get the work done without roadblocks. We haven't always agreed.
Yeah.
And I know there has been times I have just said, you know what, this is what I'm going to do, and I would do it. And
oh, you mean like flying to Spain or San Diego?
I would wait for you to slap my wrist after the fact. But it's that important to me, the work that we do here. And I think it speaks a lot to the fact that you've been doing this for 20 years in a sector, as you said, that longevity isn't there. And it's funny, there's a number of other executive directors with similar tenure to yours that are retiring and leaving the sector as well. So it's another shift is happening in the sector. But if not for the fact that you've given me this freedom to sort of run with the work and get these crazy ideas that I sometimes get that just, like a dog with a bone. If this is something that I feel strongly about, I'm going to do it. And I will hope Gerry understands after the fact, but I'm going to do it. And to have that sort of freedom is something that I've never had at any other position that I've held. I know I, at least initially, reported directly to you in a lot of the work that I did. That's changed slightly now. But if not for that freedom to be able to just do the work, just get it done and focus on, at the end of the day, my mandate personally is to ensure that we do all we can to make sure there are no new HIV infections, period, zero, end of sentence. And you've allowed me to make that happen.
Thank you. Yeah, well, some executive directors in this sector want to control everything, from buying pencils to salaries to how programs are developed.
Yeah.
I have always felt that if you give people the mandate and say, here's a job description, go with it. Rather than, who's got time to monitor everything? And when you see somebody developing the way you have since you started here many years ago, and look how we've grown. Look at the clinic that you and I together, and through your networking, we're able to get doctors and nurse practitioners to join us. We've had great support from Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. Be times it's been a little bit of ruffled feathers, but we've had community partners supporting us. We've had staff supporting us. We've had board of directors supporting us.
Yeah.
So it's been a challenge, but it's been a challenge that others have seen the vision and have grasped it and see it going forward. And so you can see continuity happening, and hopefully the staff that we have today will stay on and will develop and will be allowed to function in a similar way, but then I won't be here to worry about it.
Well, in a sector where we talk a lot about MIPA and JIPA, the meaningful engagement of people living with HIV and AIDS and the greater involvement of people living with HIV and AIDS, you are an absolute excellent example of actually implementing that. And as someone living with HIV, I thank you for that. I thank all of you for watching. You are going to be missed.
Well, thank you for indulging me. Thank you for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Have a good night.
Welcome to Manti. This is a Friday night show that can go in many different directions. And we're talking about not just what's happening with Pride this summer, but about Pride, what's going on in Barrie, Simcoe. The whole concept of living, loving, and losing is a topic that I've often wanted to go to.
The gay male population is still the population that is hardest hit by the epidemic.
How is this happening? And how did it come about that this is something that can work and bring challenges in terms of getting older folks and younger folks together?
You want people to watch with Gerry, and you want people to like the people who are coming on here, and you want people to be like, oh, look, what's Gerry going to ask next? Right? So they're kind of falling for you as they watch you, right?
Right. Was his mother religious in any?
Very
religious.
Mennonite upbringing.
So not accepting. I don't.
Not at all.
We're talking about the opioid crisis here in Barrie. Beaten up, homophobic slurs, bleach thrown on him, and a noose put around his neck.
There's barriers, and the barriers are real, and the barriers are, we need to overcome them. So tonight we're going to talk about it, and we're going to see how we can get kids to work through those barriers and feel safe and feel that they can talk to people within the school system and within service centers like the Gilbert Centre to get some direction and to get some support.